The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as Maya Richardson watched her husband slow dance with his mistress in front of 500 guests. 4 years of silence. 4 years of being told she was nothing without him. 4 years of watching her dreams die in a penthouse that felt like a prison. But Garrett Whitmore had made one fatal mistake. He had mocked the wrong woman's father. Because the retired city planner who just walked through those doors, he owned every single brick of Garrett's empire. And tonight, he came to collect. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The whispers hit Maya Richardson before she even stepped out of the black Mercedes. She could feel them, those invisible daggers wrapped in designer perfume and old money judgment, slicing through the humid Manhattan air. The rooftop venue of Sterling & Associates glittered 40 floors above the city, a constellation of power brokers and their polished wives, all waiting to watch the show. And Maya? She was the show. She just didn't know it yet. For God's sake, Maya. Garrett Whitmore's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. He didn't look at her. He never looked at her anymore. Stop fidgeting with those earrings. They look homemade. They are homemade. Maya's fingers froze on the delicate copper spirals she'd crafted herself. I designed them. Exactly my point. Garrett finally turned, his ice blue eyes scanning her the way he'd scan a contract looking for flaws. This is the firm's 20th anniversary gala. Every partner, every major client, every person who matters in New York legal circles will be here tonight. And you show up wearing arts and crafts? Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest, that squeeze of air that happened whenever Garrett reminded her, in 1,000 small ways, that she didn't belong in his world. The earrings match my dress, she said quietly. The earrings make you look like you're selling jewelry on a street corner in Baltimore. He straightened his brioni tie, checking his reflection in the car window. Which, I suppose, isn't far from the truth. The driver opened her door. Maya stepped out onto the red carpet, her legs unsteady in the heels Garrett had insisted she wear. Her own comfortable flats, the ones she could actually walk in, were hidden in her clutch like contraband. She remembered a time when Garrett had loved her earrings, when he'd called them soulful and authentic, when he'd held them up to the light in her tiny Baltimore studio and said, "These are you, Maya, real and beautiful." That was 5 years ago, before the wedding, before she'd given up her studio, her clients, her life. Before she'd learned that Garrett Whitmore didn't want a wife. He wanted an accessory, one that could be upgraded, modified, or stored away when not needed. The rooftop was a forest of silk gowns and $1,000 haircuts. Maya recognized faces from magazine covers, from news broadcasts, from the photographs that lined Garrett's office wall. These were the people who shaped laws, who bought senators, who decided which companies lived and which ones died. And here was Maya Richardson, a textile artist from West Baltimore, who used to sell her designs at farmers markets, standing among them like a wildflower in a field of hothouse orchids. "Garrett, there you are!" A woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp, confident, commanding. Victoria Lane emerged from a cluster of gray-suited men like a shark breaking the surface. She was everything Maya wasn't. Tall, blonde, surgically perfected, with a kind of angular beauty that photographed well in courtroom sketches. Senior partner at the firm, Garrett's mentor, and, Maya had suspected for over a year now, something much more. Victoria. Garrett's entire demeanor transformed. His shoulders relaxed, his smile, the real one, the one Maya hadn't seen directed at her in years, spread across his face. "You look stunning." "Dolce." Victoria did a small turn, showing off her fitted white gown. "A gift from the Martinelli account." Her eyes slid to Maya, traveling from her braided hair down to her simple navy dress with the same assessment one might give a stain on expensive upholstery. "Maya, how comfortable you look." "Thank you." Maya forced the words through a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Did you make those earrings yourself? They're so artisanal." The word dripped with condescension. Maya heard what Victoria really meant. Cheap, homemade, not belonging here. "I did," Maya said. "I'm a textile artist." "Were," Garrett corrected, not looking at her. She was a textile artist. It was a hobby. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. 4 years of building a business. 3 gallery showings. A feature in Baltimore Magazine. Reduced to a hobby in 2 words. How sweet, Victoria's red lips curved. It must be nice to have time for hobbies. The rest of us are so busy actually working. She slipped her arm through Garrett's. "Darling, Marcus Webb is here from the Cromwell merger. We absolutely must speak with him. It's urgent." She was already steering him away before Maya could respond. Garrett threw a glance over his shoulder. "Try to mingle, Maya, and please, don't talk about thread counts or whatever it is you do. These people discuss real business." And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd with Victoria pressed against his side like she'd been designed to fit there. Maya stood alone in the middle of 500 people, the invisible weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction. She could feel the sidelong glances, hear the whispered observations. "That's Garrett Whitmore's wife? I heard she was some kind of seamstress before they married. She looks lost, poor thing. Well, you know Garrett. He always did like his charity projects." The words floated around her like poison gas. Maya moved toward the edge of the crowd, searching for something solid to anchor herself to. A railing, a wall, anything that wasn't shifting judgment. She found a quiet corner near a towering floral arrangement and tried to breathe. The city spread out below her, a carpet of lights that usually made her feel small in a beautiful way. Tonight, it just made her feel small. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "How's the party, baby girl? Knock 'em dead." Maya's eyes burned. James Richardson, her rock, her champion, the man who'd raised her alone after her mother passed when Maya was 7. A retired city planner who'd worked for Baltimore's housing department for 30 years. A man who drove a 15-year-old Honda and called her every Sunday without fail. Garrett called him quaint. Once, early in their marriage, he'd suggested that James not attend their anniversary dinner because he might feel out of place among our circle. Our circle. As if Maya had ever been part of Garrett's circle. She started to type a response. "It's fine, Dad. Having a great time." But her fingers wouldn't form the lie. Instead, she shoved the phone back into her clutch and blinked hard against the tears. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Maya turned to find a young woman in a server's uniform holding a tray of champagne. "Can I get you anything? You look like you could use—" The server trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish. "You look like you could use an escape route? A different life? A husband who doesn't treat you like an embarrassment?" "I'm fine," Maya said. "Thank you." The server nodded and moved away, but not before Maya caught the look of pity in her eyes. Even the help could see it. Even a 20-something waitress earning minimum wage understood that Maya Richardson was a woman drowning at her own party. 30 minutes passed. Garrett didn't return. Maya watched him work the room, Victoria perpetually at his side. They moved together like dancers who'd rehearsed for years. Victoria laughing at his jokes, Garrett touching her back. Both of them orbiting each other with an intimacy that made Maya's stomach turn. Was she being paranoid? She'd asked herself that question 1,000 times over the past year. The late nights at the office. The business dinners that stretched past midnight. The way Garrett flinched now when she touched him, as if her hands were something unclean. Number. She wasn't paranoid. She was finally seeing clearly. "There you are!" Garrett's voice startled her. He appeared at her elbow, his hand gripping her arm with enough pressure to leave marks. "I need you for the partner's photo. Try to smile like you're actually happy to be here." He propelled her toward a cluster of people arranged before a photographer. Maya recognized the firm's founding partners, old men with older money, and their wives, women whose faces had been lifted so many times they looked perpetually surprised. "Everyone, this is my wife, Maya," Garrett announced. He didn't say her last name. He never did at these events. Richardson, her father's name, the name she'd kept, was too common, too ordinary, too black for Garrett's world. "Lovely to meet you," murmured one of the wives, her eyes already sliding past Maya to something more interesting. "What a beautiful dress," said another, in a tone that made clear she meant the opposite. Maya smiled. She posed. She felt the photographer's flash like a series of small explosions, each one capturing evidence of her unhappiness. After the photos, Garrett released her arm with a small shove. "Go get yourself a drink or something. I have actual work to do." He was gone again before she could respond. Back to Victoria. Back to the people who mattered. Maya drifted toward the bar. Her feet ached in the ridiculous heels. Her head pounded from the forced smiling. She thought about her studio back in Baltimore, the one she'd given up when she moved into Garrett's sterile Manhattan penthouse. The way the light came through the windows in the morning, turning the dust motes into gold. The feel of fabric between her fingers. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw materials. She hadn't created anything beautiful in 4 years. Garrett had seen to that. "It's a lovely hobby, but it's not befitting a Whitmore," he'd said when she suggested setting up a studio in the penthouse. "The smell of those dyes gives me headaches," he'd complained when she tried working in the guest room. "My colleagues' wives sit on charity boards. They don't hawk crafts at street fairs." Piece by piece, he'd dismantled her, and she'd let him. That was the part that burned the most. She had let him. "Maya Whitmore!" A booming voice pulled her from her thoughts. Harold Chen, one of the firm's senior partners, approached with a woman Maya didn't recognize. He was sweating, despite the air conditioning, his face flushed with too much champagne. "Harold," Maya said, "nice to see you." "This is Margaret Webb, from the Cromwell account." Harold gestured at the elegant older woman beside him. "She was just asking about Garrett's background, and I told her the best person to ask was his lovely wife." Margaret Webb extended a hand, weighed down by diamonds. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is quite the rising star. How did you two meet?" It was a simple question, a party question. The kind of thing Maya had answered 100 times. But tonight, something cracked. "We met at a gallery showing," Maya said, "in Baltimore. I was the featured artist." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "An artist? How wonderful! What medium?" "Textile design, woven pieces mostly. Tapestries, wall hangings, wearable art." The words came faster now, tumbling out of some locked room inside her. "I had just landed my first major commission when Garrett walked in. He bought 3 pieces, said they were the most authentic art he'd ever seen." Harold's smile was frozen. This wasn't the script. Maya was supposed to be demure, forgettable, a pleasant footnote to Garrett's brilliance. "And do you still create?" Margaret asked, seemingly genuinely interested. Maya hesitated. The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that she hadn't touched a loom in over a year, that her hands had forgotten the rhythm of the shuttle, that the artist Garrett claimed to love had been slowly suffocated. "I'm taking a break," she finished lamely. What a shame. Margaret's eyes were kind, knowing. Art isn't something you take a break from, my dear. It's something you are. Garrett materialized beside them, his hand clamping onto Maya's shoulder like a vice. I see you've met my wife. His voice was cheerful, but his fingers dug into her flesh. What has she been telling you? I hope she hasn't been boring you with stories about yarn. Actually, she was telling me about her art career, Margaret said coolly, which sounds quite accomplished. Career is a strong word, Garrett laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maya dabbled. Very talented, very creative, but you know how it is. Once we got married, she had more important things to focus on. Like what? Margaret asked. The question hung in the air. Like what? Like sitting alone in a penthouse? Like attending parties where she was treated as furniture? Like slowly forgetting who she used to be? Like supporting me, of course. Garrett's grip tightened. Behind every successful man and all that. He flashed his campaign smile. Margaret, Harold, would you excuse us? I need to borrow my wife for a moment. He steered her away from the group, his fingers still pressed into her shoulder. What the hell was that? He hissed, once they were out of earshot. What was what? Art career? Featured artist? Why are you telling people about that? Because it's true, Maya said, the crack inside her widening. Because it happened. Because before I met you, I was somebody. Garrett stopped walking. He turned to face her, and for a moment, Maya saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not anger, not contempt. Fear. You were nobody, he said quietly. A nobody from nowhere who got very, very lucky. Don't ever forget that. The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, her heel catching on the floor, stumbling slightly. And another thing. Garrett moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Whatever you think you know about me and Victoria, forget it. Your imagination is not a substitute for reality. I am the best thing that ever happened to you. Without me, you'd still be begging tourists to buy your little crafts. Without me, your father would be eating dog food in some Baltimore tenement. Remember, your place. He released her and straightened his jacket, the mask of charm sliding back into place. Now, I have important people to talk to. Try not to embarrass me any further tonight. He walked away, leaving Maya standing alone once again. But this time, something was different. The crack that had started to form, the tiny fissure in the wall she'd built around her true self, had split wide open. She thought about her father, James Richardson, who had worked 2 jobs to put her through art school, who had cried at her first gallery showing, who had told her over and over that she was worthy of everything good in this world. Never let anyone take the thing that makes you, you, he'd said, when she told him about Garrett's suggestions to stop designing. That's the part of you that's priceless. She had let Garrett take it. All of it. Her art, her confidence, her sense of self. She had handed over the keys to her own soul and watched him lock the door. No more. Maya moved toward the restroom, her mind racing. She would find Garrett. She would tell him she was leaving. Not tomorrow, not after a civilized discussion with lawyers. Tonight. She would walk out of this party and this marriage and never look back. The bathroom was mercifully empty. Maya gripped the marble sink and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable. The spark that used to light her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull resignation. "Wake up," she whispered to her reflection. "Remember who you are." She splashed cold water on her face, ruining the makeup Garrett had insisted she wear. Good. She didn't want to be the polished mannequin anymore. She wanted to be Maya Richardson, the woman who created beautiful things with her hands, who had built something from nothing, who had once believed she could conquer the world. She walked out of the bathroom with her spine straight and her jaw set. And then she saw them. The band had shifted to a slow song, some jazz standard that floated over the crowd like silk. A small space had cleared on the dance floor, and there, in the center of it, was Garrett, with Victoria. His hand was splayed across the small of her back. Her arms were wrapped around his neck. Their bodies moved together as one, their cheeks nearly touching, their lips inches apart. They were whispering. Victoria laughed, a low, throaty sound of pure intimacy. It wasn't a dance. It was a declaration. Maya stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. All around her, people were watching. Some whispered behind their hands. Others looked away in feigned ignorance. But they all saw. Every single person at this party could see what was happening. The husband and his mistress, wrapped in each other's arms, while the wife stood alone. The humiliation was complete. Total. Absolute. Maya felt a sound rising in her throat. A scream, a sob, she couldn't tell which. She bit down on her lip hard enough to draw blood. Victoria's eyes found hers across the room. A slow smile spread across the other woman's face. She didn't pull away from Garrett. Instead, she seemed to press closer, her gaze never leaving Maya's. Then, deliberately, Victoria raised her champagne glass in a small, mocking toast. To you, her eyes seemed to say. To the wife who never mattered at all. Maya's glass, the one she hadn't even realized she was holding, slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, champagne spreading like a golden stain at her feet. Heads turned. The music faltered. For a horrible, endless moment, every eye in the room was on her. The wife, the nobody, the woman who had just publicly witnessed her own replacement. Garrett finally pulled away from Victoria. His expression as he looked at Maya wasn't guilt or shame. It was annoyance, pure, undisguised irritation at her for causing a scene. Maya couldn't breathe. The walls of the rooftop seemed to close in around her, the glittering crowd pressing tighter, the lights too bright, the air too thin. She turned and ran, not toward Garrett, not toward the exit, toward a door she'd noticed earlier, a small service entrance that led to a private section of the rooftop. She burst through it and found herself on a narrow balcony, the city stretching out below her in a sea of uncaring lights. The cool night air hit her like a wave, and the tears she'd been holding back finally broke free. They streamed down her face, hot and silent and unstoppable. She gripped the railing and let herself fall apart. She cried for the woman she used to be, for the artist who had believed in herself, for the daughter who had made her father proud. She cried for the 4 years she had wasted trying to become someone she was never meant to be, trying to earn the love of a man who was incapable of giving it. She cried until there was nothing left, and then, slowly, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked out at the city that had been Garrett's, never hers, and made a decision. She was leaving. Tonight. Right now. She didn't need a plan. She didn't need a lawyer. She needed to walk out that door and never look back. Maya turned and pushed back through the service entrance, her resolve like steel in her chest. But the scene she walked into stopped her cold. A shift had occurred at the entrance to the ballroom, a subtle change in the atmosphere that rippled inward like a stone dropped in still water. Security guards, who had been slouching, now stood at attention, their faces alert, respectful. A man had entered. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and dark skin that glowed with health. His suit was simple, charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, but free of flash or logos. He wore no diamond cufflinks, no designer watch. His power wasn't something he displayed. It was something he was. People who didn't know him stepped aside instinctively. The host, a nervous socialite named Patricia, rushed over with a flutter of panic. "Sir, I'm so sorry. This is a private—" The man handed her a card. Patricia glanced at it. The color drained from her face. "Mr. Richardson," she stammered. "Of course. We weren't expecting— Please, come in. Can I get you anything?" "That won't be necessary." The man's voice was calm, measured, carrying an authority that silenced the nearby chatter. His eyes, a deep, warm brown, scanned the room with clear purpose. They swept past the chandeliers, past the buffet tables, past the clusters of gossips and power brokers. They found Maya, and Maya's heart stopped. Because she knew this man. She knew the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw, the quiet strength in his gaze. She knew him better than she knew anyone in the world. It was her father, James Richardson, the retired city planner, the man who drove a 15-year-old Honda and called her every Sunday, the man whose pension Garrett had mocked not 2 hours ago. But the way people were looking at him, the way they parted before him like water before a ship, that wasn't how anyone looked at a retired city planner. Something was very, very wrong. Or maybe, Maya thought as her father's eyes met hers, as she saw the love there mixed with a fury she'd never witnessed before, something was finally terribly right. James Richardson walked through that ballroom like a man who had been walking through rooms full of powerful people his entire life. His stride was unhurried, deliberate, each step carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He didn't look left or right at the gawking faces. He didn't acknowledge the whispers that erupted in his wake. His eyes never left his daughter. Maya stood frozen, her mind trying to reconcile two impossible realities. This was her father, the same man who had taught her to ride a bike on the cracked sidewalks of West Baltimore, who had burned pancakes every Saturday morning because he always got distracted reading the newspaper, who had held her hand at her mother's funeral and promised her that everything would be okay. But this was also a stranger, a man who made the most powerful people in New York City step aside like frightened children. Garrett had noticed the commotion. He extracted himself from Victoria's embrace, his predator's instincts immediately alert to new opportunity. He smoothed his jacket and began moving toward the entrance, his smile already forming. "Who is that?" he murmured to Victoria. "I don't know." Victoria's eyes narrowed, calculating. "But look at how Patricia is fawning over him. He's someone." "Richardson," Garrett said, having overheard Patricia's stammered greeting. "The name sounds familiar." "Finance? Real estate? There's a Richardson Capital Trust based in Delaware," Victoria said slowly. "Very low profile. Old money, from what I've heard. They don't do press, don't attend events. Some people think they're a myth. Well, whoever he is, he just walked into my firm's party." Garrett straightened his tie. Time to make a new friend. He intercepted James just as the older man was a few feet from Maya. "Good evening, sir." Garrett extended his hand, deploying the full wattage of his courtroom charm. "Garrett Whitmore, senior partner. Welcome to our anniversary gala. I don't believe we've had the pleasure." James stopped walking. He looked at Garrett's outstretched hand for a long moment. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Making no move to take it. Then his eyes lifted to meet Garrett's. He said nothing. The silence stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Garrett's smile began to falter, his hand dropping awkwardly to his side. He was a man who had built his career on dominating every room he entered, on reading people and manipulating them with surgical precision. But this silent, absolute dismissal was something he had never encountered. James stepped around him as if he were a piece of furniture and walked the final few steps to his daughter. His entire demeanor transformed. The hard edge of authority melted away, replaced by a look of such profound love that it made Maya's throat close. Mia. His voice was soft, using the childhood nickname that only he was allowed to use. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right, baby girl? Maya's composure shattered. A sob escaped her lips. The first sound she'd made since seeing her husband dance with his mistress. Daddy? The word came out broken, a child's plea wrapped in a grown woman's voice. How did you... I don't understand what's happening. I know, sweetheart. James pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had when she was 7 years old and crying at her mother's grave. I know you're confused, but I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that? Maya nodded against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd worn her entire life. Behind them, Garrett recovered enough to try again. He approached with his hands spread in a gesture of confusion and manufactured friendliness. I'm sorry, there seems to be some misunderstanding here. His voice was still smooth, but an edge had crept in. Sir, I'm not sure who you are, but this woman is my wife, and... James released Maya and turned to face Garrett. The transformation was instantaneous. The loving father vanished, replaced by something cold and immovable. I know exactly who your wife is, Mr. Whitmore. James's voice carried across the now silent ballroom. The question is whether you do. Garrett blinked. I beg your pardon? My name is James Richardson. The words fell like stones into still water. Maya is my daughter. For a moment, Garrett's face was blank. Then comprehension dawned, followed immediately by a flicker of something that might have been fear before he buried it under a layer of practiced composure. James Richardson. Garrett forced a laugh. Maya's father, of course. I've heard so much about you. The retired city planner, right? Baltimore Housing Department? Among other things. Well, this is certainly a surprise. Garrett's voice had taken on a strained quality. Maya, darling, you didn't tell me your father was planning the visit. We could have arranged something more appropriate. Maya said nothing. She was watching her father's face, trying to understand the man standing before her. I wasn't planning to visit, James said calmly. I was planning to observe. But circumstances changed. Observe? Garrett's mask slipped slightly. What does that mean? James didn't answer. Instead, he turned to look at the crowd that had gathered around them. Partners, clients, society figures, all watching with the rapt attention of spectators at a blood sport. I apologize for interrupting your celebration, James said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room. But I'm afraid there are some matters that need to be addressed publicly. Matters that affect everyone here who has trusted their legal affairs to this firm. Patricia, the hostess, pushed through the crowd with a glass of champagne and a desperate smile. Mr. Richardson, please, perhaps we could discuss whatever this is somewhere more private? I'm sure there's been some kind of... There's been no misunderstanding. James's tone was polite but final. And no, this cannot wait. Victoria had been hanging back, watching the exchange with calculating eyes. Now she stepped forward, her white gown catching the light. Mr. Richardson. She extended her hand with practiced grace. I'm Victoria Lane, senior partner. I'm sure whatever concerns you have about the firm can be addressed through proper channels. Perhaps you'd like to schedule a meeting with our managing committee. James looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. Miss Lane, he said quietly. I would advise you to remain silent for the rest of this conversation. Victoria's smile froze. Excuse me? You heard me. Now wait just a minute. Garrett stepped between them, his voice rising. I don't know who you think you are, but you can't walk into my firm's event and start threatening people. Whatever issues you have with me personally, there's no need to— Issues with you personally. James repeated the words slowly, tasting them. Is that what you think this is? Look, I understand that Maya may have painted a certain picture of our marriage. Garrett's voice dropped, attempting intimacy, trying to pull James into a private conversation away from the watching crowd. She's been unhappy lately, and I take responsibility for that. I've been working too much, neglecting her. But that's between a man and his wife. It's not something that needs to be aired in public. You're right that you've neglected her, James said, though I suspect your definition of neglect differs significantly from mine. Dad? Maya touched her father's arm. What is happening? How did you know to come here? And why is everyone looking at you like— Like what, sweetheart? Like you're someone. The question hung in the air. James's expression softened when he looked at his daughter. Because I am someone, Mia. I've always been someone. I just chose not to let that define either of our lives. He took her hands in his. When your mother died, I made a decision. I decided that you would grow up knowing your own worth, not the worth of your family's money or connections, but your worth as a human being, your talent, your character, your heart. I don't understand. Maya shook her head. You worked for the city. You drove that old Honda. We lived in that little house on Edmondson Avenue. I worked for the city because I believed in public service. I drove that car because it got me where I needed to go. We lived in that house because it was the house where I fell in love with your mother, and I couldn't bear to leave it. James's voice cracked slightly. But Mia, none of that meant I was poor. Then what? Richardson Capital Trust, Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp with sudden understanding. My God, you're the Richardson, the one nobody's ever seen, the ghost investor. James turned to look at her. I told you to remain silent, Miss Lane. But that's impossible. Victoria's composure was crumbling. Richardson Capital has holdings in half the Fortune 500. They've funded more private equity deals in the last decade than Goldman and Morgan combined. The estimates put their total assets at— Miss Lane, James's voice cut through her rambling like a blade. I am well aware of my own net worth, and I am rapidly losing patience with your inability to follow simple instructions. The blood drained from Victoria's face. Garrett was staring at James as if seeing him for the first time. His mind, that brilliant calculating instrument that had made him one of the most feared litigators in New York, was working frantically, reassessing everything he thought he knew. That's not possible, he said slowly. Maya's father is a retired city planner. She grew up middle class. She sold her little crafts at farmers' markets. She grew up the way I chose to raise her, James corrected. With values, with humility, with the understanding that what you create with your hands and heart matters more than what you inherit or acquire. He took a step closer to Garrett. She built a business from nothing because I wanted her to know she could, because I wanted her to be proud of her own accomplishments, not spend her life spending someone else's money. But you let her marry me. Garrett's voice was rising, an edge of hysteria creeping in. You let her give up her career, live in my penthouse, wear my name. If you had all this money, all this power, why would you let her? Because she loved you. The 3 words were heavy with contempt. She came to me 5 years ago, eyes bright, heart full, and told me she'd met the most wonderful man. A man who saw her for who she really was. A man who valued authenticity over pretense. A man who made her feel like the most special woman in the world. James paused, letting the silence gather weight. She was wrong, of course. But she believed it, and I had always promised myself that I would let her make her own choices, even the ones I disagreed with. So I watched. I waited. I hoped I was wrong about you. You investigated me. Garrett's face was reddening. You had people watching us. I protected my daughter the only way I could while still honoring her independence. I had people keeping me informed. Nothing intrusive, just enough to know she was safe. James's expression hardened. And for 4 years, I told myself that her unhappiness was growing pains, that all marriages have difficult periods, that she would find her way back to herself. He turned to look at Maya, and his eyes glistened. But tonight, my man called me from this very party. He told me what he witnessed. He described how you treated her, the public mockery, the dismissiveness, the cruelty. He told me about the earrings. The earrings? Garrett laughed incredulously. This is about jewelry? It's about watching my daughter, my brilliant, talented daughter, who used to light up any room she walked into, stand alone in a crowd while her husband mocked the only piece of herself she had left. James's voice dropped to something just above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room like a thunderclap. It's about watching you try to erase her, and I decided that I was done watching. Maya was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of something else. Relief, maybe, or recognition, as if she was finally seeing something that had been hidden in plain sight her entire life. "Daddy," she whispered, "why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I wanted you to know your own strength, baby girl. I wanted you to succeed on your own terms, fail on your own terms, build a life that belonged to you alone. I was afraid that if you knew about the money, it would change you, and you were already so perfect the way you were." "But I failed," Maya's voice broke. "I let him change me. I let him take everything that made me, me." "No," James cupped her face in his hands. "You survived. You bent, but you didn't break. And now, you're going to remember who you are." "This is all very touching." Garrett's voice had gone cold, his survival instincts kicking in. "But I don't see what any of this has to do with my firm or my marriage. So your father-in-law is secretly wealthy. Congratulations. That doesn't change the facts of our situation." "And what are the facts, Mr. Whitmore?" "The facts are that Maya signed a prenuptial agreement. The facts are that she's entitled to a modest settlement, nothing more. The facts are that whatever dramatics you're attempting here tonight won't change the legal reality that I built this firm and this life with my own hands, and I'm not about to let some surprise billionaire father-in-law intimidate me into—" "4 years ago," James interrupted calmly, "Sterling & Associates was drowning." Garrett stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry?" "4 years ago, this firm was on the verge of collapse. You had overextended on the Henderson case. Your expansion into corporate litigation was hemorrhaging money. 3 of your largest clients had jumped ship to rival firms." James began to pace slowly, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a professor delivering a lecture. "You were 6 months from bankruptcy. The partners were threatening mutiny. Your reputation was in tatters." "That's not—" Garrett's face had gone pale. "How do you know about Henderson?" "Because I make it my business to know everything about anyone who enters my daughter's life." James stopped pacing. "And because I was the one who saved you." The words landed like a bomb. What are you talking about? Garrett's voice was barely above a whisper. In the summer of 4 years ago, you received an anonymous investment through a Delaware holding company. $47 million in immediate capital, with a promise of additional funding as needed. The money came with no strings attached, just a silent partnership agreement that gave the investor a controlling interest in exchange for keeping you afloat. Garrett was shaking his head, but his face had gone the color of ash. You spent 3 years trying to identify your benefactor, James continued. You hired private investigators. You called in favors from every contact you had in finance. You never found a name because the name was buried under 17 layers of shell companies and trusts. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The name, Mr. Whitmore, was Richardson Capital. The name was me. No, Garrett took a step backward. No, that's impossible. The investment came from the Whitney Fund, a consortium of... The Whitney Fund is a subsidiary of the Alcott Group, which is managed by Richardson Capital Trust. James pulled a thin folder from inside his jacket. Maya hadn't even noticed he was carrying it. I have the complete paper trail here, if you'd like to review it. Though I suspect your lawyers will be doing that quite thoroughly in the coming weeks. Garrett grabbed the folder, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. His face cycled through disbelief, denial, and finally a horrified recognition. This can't be right, he muttered. This can't be right. I built this firm. I built it from nothing. You built it from my money. James's voice was ice. Money I invested because my daughter said she loved you. Money I gave freely because I wanted her to be secure, to be happy, to have a life with a man who would cherish her the way she deserved. He took a step closer to Garrett, and for the first time his voice rose. And you repaid me. You repaid her by trying to destroy the very things that made her worth loving in the first place. Maya watched her husband crumble. The man who had dominated her for 4 years, who had made her feel small and worthless and invisible, was shrinking before her eyes. He looked like a child caught in a lie, desperately searching for an escape that didn't exist. I didn't know, Garrett stammered. I didn't know who you were. If I had known... What? You would have treated her better? James laughed, a short, bitter sound. You would have faked respect instead of contempt? You would have hidden your cruelty behind a more careful mask? I never meant... Don't. The single word cut through Garrett's protests like a knife. Don't insult either of us by pretending this was anything other than what it was. You saw my daughter as an opportunity, a pretty face to hang on your arm, a project to be molded. And when she didn't bend the way you wanted, when she insisted on remaining herself, you decided to break her instead. Garrett's jaw tightened. The initial shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by something harder. Survival mode. Whatever you think you know about my marriage, he said slowly, it's none of your business. Maya is a grown woman. She made her own choices. Choices you manipulated her into making. That's her perspective, not mine. Actually, it's the perspective of everyone in this room who watched you dance with your mistress while your wife stood alone. The word mistress rippled through the crowd. Victoria, who had been standing frozen a few feet away, flinched as if struck. That's slander, Garrett said quickly. Victoria and I are colleagues, friends, nothing more. Is that so? James turned to look at Victoria, who seemed to be trying to disappear into the crowd. Miss Lane, would you care to confirm or deny that characterization? Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because I have to say, James continued, his voice almost conversational, the embrace I was told about didn't look particularly collegial, and the overnight charges to the firm's corporate card at the Four Seasons last month didn't seem like standard business expenses. Garrett's head whipped toward Victoria. You used the corporate card? I didn't think anyone would. Victoria stopped herself, realizing too late that she had just confirmed everything. "So much for slander," James said mildly. Maya watched the exchange with a strange sense of detachment. For months, she had suspected. She had lain awake at night, wondering if she was being paranoid, wondering if the distance between her and Garrett was her fault. Now, watching them turn on each other, she felt something unexpected. Relief. She hadn't been crazy. She hadn't been imagining things. The marriage she had tried so desperately to save had never been worth saving in the first place. "Dad?" Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been all night. "I want to leave." James turned to her, his expression softening. "Of course, sweetheart. We can go right now." "Wait." Garrett stepped forward, his hand reaching for Maya's arm. "Maya, we need to talk about this. In private. Whatever your father thinks he knows, don't touch me." Maya pulled away before his fingers could make contact. The words came out sharp, surprising even herself. "Don't you ever touch me again." Garrett froze, his hand suspended in midair. "Maya, be reasonable. This is all a misunderstanding. Your father has obviously been misinformed, and we can clear everything up if we just—" "Misinformed?" Maya felt a laugh building in her chest. Not a happy sound, but something dark and raw. "He watched you dance with her, Garrett. The whole room watched you dance with her. While I stood there like a fool, trying to figure out what I did wrong, you were wrapped around another woman like I didn't exist. That was nothing. Victoria and I were just— I don't care what you were." Maya stepped closer to him, and for the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel small in his presence. "I don't care about your excuses. I don't care about your explanations. I spent 4 years caring about what you thought, what you wanted, what would make you happy. I'm done." "You're done?" Garrett's voice turned cold. "You think you can just walk away? We have a life together. Assets. Legal obligations. You signed a prenup, Maya. You'll leave this marriage with nothing." "I had nothing when I came in," Maya said quietly. "And everything I thought I had, your love, your respect, your partnership, turned out to be nothing anyway. So I guess that works out." "Your father can't protect you forever. Whatever money he has, I have lawyers. I have connections. I will drag this divorce through every court in New York until—" "Mr. Whitmore." James's voice cut through Garrett's threats like a blade through silk. "I think there's one more thing you should know before you start making threats." Garrett turned, his face flushed with anger. "I'm done listening to you." "That's unfortunate, because what I'm about to say concerns not just your marriage, but your entire career." James paused, letting the silence build. "It concerns Miss Lane's extracurricular activities." Victoria, who had been edging toward the exit, froze. "What are you talking about?" Garrett demanded. "I'm talking about 18 months of confidential client information being funneled to a rival firm. I'm talking about proprietary case strategies appearing in competitors' hands weeks before trial. I'm talking about the systematic betrayal of this firm's most sensitive assets by someone with unlimited access to your files and your bed." The color drained from Garrett's face. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've been wondering for over a year why you keep losing bids, why competitors seem to anticipate your every move, why cases you thought were sure wins suddenly collapse at the last moment." James's smile was thin as a knife's edge. "The answer has been standing beside you this whole time." Every head in the room turned toward Victoria Lane. "That's a lie." Victoria's voice was high, strained. "Garrett, he's lying. I would never." "I have the evidence," James said calmly. "Encrypted emails to Marcus Webb at Harrison and Cole. Wire transfers to an offshore account in your name. Testimony from the junior associate you recruited to help you." He tilted his head, studying her. Did you think you could play in my world without me noticing? Victoria's face crumbled. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. Garrett, she reached for him. Garrett, let me explain. It wasn't what it sounds like. Webb approached me. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would— Garrett jerked away from her hand as if it were poison. Don't touch me. But Garrett, I said don't touch me. His voice echoed through the ballroom. My God, it was you. It was you the whole time. The Henderson appeal, the Cromwell merger, the Petrov case. He was breathing hard now, his careful composure completely shattered. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? Cost you? Victoria's shock transformed into something harder. You want to talk about cost? You used me, Garrett. You used everyone around you. I was just smarter about using you back. Maya watched the two of them turn on each other, the husband and the mistress, their alliance dissolving in the harsh light of exposure. She felt her father's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. Come on, baby girl, James said softly. Let's leave them to it. But Maya didn't move, not yet. There was one more thing she needed to say. She walked toward Garrett, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The crowd parted for her like water before a ship. When she reached him, she stood close enough to see the tiny veins of panic in his eyes. I want you to remember something, she said, her voice clear and calm. When this is all over, when you've lost your firm and your reputation and everything you built on my father's money, I want you to remember that you could have had me, the real me, the woman who would have loved you through anything, who would have built something beautiful with you, who would have been your partner in every way that matters. She leaned closer. But you didn't want her. You wanted a trophy, an accessory, a woman you could diminish so you'd feel bigger. She stepped back. And now you have nothing at all. She turned and walked toward her father without looking back. Behind her, she heard Victoria shouting accusations at Garrett, heard Garrett threatening lawyers and lawsuits, heard the crowd buzzing with the kind of scandalized excitement that would fuel Manhattan gossip columns for months. But it all sounded very far away. James took her hand, and together they walked toward the exit. The sea of people parted before them, and Maya saw something new in their faces. Not pity, not contempt. Something closer to respect. At the door, she paused and looked back one final time. Garrett stood alone in the center of the ballroom, Victoria having fled somewhere into the crowd. He was surrounded by people, but utterly isolated. A man watching his kingdom crumble in real time. Their eyes met across the distance. Maya smiled. Then she walked out into the cool Manhattan night, leaving the gilded cage behind, forever. The black sedan moved through the Manhattan streets like a shadow, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Maya sat in the back seat beside her father, her hands still trembling in her lap. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ballroom was beginning to fade, leaving behind a hollow, shaky feeling. Neither of them spoke for several blocks. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had too much to say and no idea where to begin. Finally, Maya broke it. You let me struggle. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. All those years in Baltimore, the student loans, the months I couldn't make rent. You let me think I was on my own. James turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When your mother was dying, he said slowly, she made me promise something. She said she didn't want you to grow up like the children she'd seen in her work. the ones born into money, who never learned what it meant to earn something, to fail at something, to pick themselves up and try again. Maya's throat tightened at the mention of her mother. Grace Richardson had been a social worker, spending her career trying to help families in crisis. She had died when Maya was 7, leaving behind a void that had never fully healed. "Your mother grew up wealthy," James continued. "Did you know that? Her family had money, old money, from generations back. And she watched what it did to her siblings. The entitlement, the emptiness, the way they measured their worth in dollars instead of character." He shook his head. "She ran away from it, changed her name, built a new life. And when she married me, she made me swear that if we ever had children, we would raise them differently." "But you had money too." "I made my money, Mia. Every cent of it. I started with nothing but a brain and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. By the time I met your mother, I was already wealthy beyond what either of us would ever need. But she didn't care about that. She cared that I understood what it meant to struggle. She cared that I would never let money define me." The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, the storefronts glowing with designer displays that Maya had walked past 1,000 times without ever really seeing. "So when she died," James said, his voice thick with old grief, "I kept my promise. I gave you her values, her strength, her belief that what you create matters more than what you inherit. I wanted you to know, deep in your bones, that you could survive anything, that you didn't need anyone's money, not even mine." "But I failed," Maya's voice cracked. "I married a man who spent 4 years trying to destroy me. How is that surviving?" "Baby girl, look at me." Maya turned to face her father. "You didn't fail. You made a choice that didn't work out. There's a difference." He took her hand in his, and when it mattered, when it really mattered, you found your spine. You walked out of that ballroom with your head held high. You looked that man in the eye and told him exactly what he'd lost. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You're wrong." James squeezed her hand. "I didn't give you that strength tonight. I just reminded you it was there. You've always had it, Mia. You just forgot for a while." The car pulled to a stop in front of an elegant brownstone on the Upper West Side. Maya looked at it through the window, confusion flickering across her face. "Where are we?" "Home," James said simply. "My home, when I'm in New York. And yours, for as long as you need it." They climbed the steps together, and James unlocked the door to reveal a warm, welcoming interior that looked nothing like Garrett's cold, minimalist penthouse. There were books everywhere, overflowing shelves, stacked on tables, piled beside comfortable chairs. The walls were covered with art, including several pieces that Maya recognized with a sharp intake of breath. "Those are mine," she whispered. "My early work. How did you—" "I bought them all," James smiled gently. "Every piece you ever sold, if I could track it down. I have a collection in the basement that would make a museum jealous." Maya walked to the nearest wall, reaching out to touch a tapestry she'd woven in her last year of art school. She remembered the hours she'd spent on it, the way her fingers had ached from the work, the pride she'd felt when it finally sold to an anonymous buyer. "I thought someone in California bought this." "They did, and then I bought it from them. Paid 3 times what you'd sold it for, as I recall." James moved to stand beside her. "I never missed a single piece of your work, Mia. I was at every gallery showing, every farmer's market, every small exhibition you ever did. I just stayed in the background, watched from a distance." "I never saw you." "You weren't supposed to, but I was there, always." Maya's eyes filled with tears. All those years, she'd thought she was alone, building something from nothing, proving herself to the world. Her father had been watching. believing in her, loving her from a distance that must have been agonizing to maintain. "I'm sorry," she said, not entirely sure what she was apologizing for. "Don't be." James pulled her into a hug. "You were exactly who I raised you to be. Strong, independent, resilient. The fact that you hit a rough patch doesn't change any of that. It just means you're human." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the warmth of a home that felt more real than anything Maya had experienced in years. Finally, James stepped back. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, we start taking apart your husband's world, piece by piece." James's expression hardened. Tonight was just the opening act. Maya slept deeper than she had in months. The guest room at her father's brownstone was simple but comfortable, with soft cotton sheets and blackout curtains that blocked the city's perpetual glow. For the first time since she could remember, she didn't lie awake counting the ways she'd failed. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices downstairs. Pulling on a robe she found in the closet, she made her way to the kitchen. James was seated at a large wooden table across from a woman Maya didn't recognize. Tall, black, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of sharp, assessing gaze that immediately marked her as someone not to be underestimated. "Ah, there she is." James rose to pour Maya a cup of coffee. "Mia, this is Evelyn Carter. She's been my attorney for over 20 years. And as of this morning, she's yours as well." "Mrs. Whitmore," Evelyn extended a hand. "Or should I say, Ms. Richardson? I understand you'll be returning to your maiden name." "Maya is fine." Maya shook her hand, still trying to wake up fully. "What time is it?" "Just after 9. James set the coffee in front of her. "I let you sleep as long as I could, but Evelyn has news that couldn't wait." Maya sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "What kind of news?" Evelyn opened a leather folder on the table, revealing a stack of documents. "It seems your husband didn't waste any time. His attorneys filed an emergency motion at 7 this morning, attempting to freeze all joint assets and seeking a temporary restraining order against your father." "A restraining order?" "He's claiming harassment and interference in his business affairs." Evelyn's tone made clear what she thought of that strategy. "It's a desperation move. The kind of thing lawyers do when they know their client is in deep trouble and they're trying to buy time." "Will it work?" "Not a chance." Evelyn pulled out another document. "The judge assigned to the case is Martha Okonkwo. She and I went to law school together. More importantly, she has zero patience for wealthy men who try to use the court system as a weapon against their wives." Maya felt a small spark of hope. "So what happens now?" "Now, we go on offense." Evelyn leaned forward. "Your husband made several critical errors last night. First, he publicly confirmed his affair with Victoria Lane in front of hundreds of witnesses. Second, he threatened you with financial ruin, which several people overheard. And third, and this is the important part, he attempted to physically grab you after you told him not to touch you." "That's assault?" Maya asked, surprised. "In New York? With the right witnesses?" "Absolutely. We won't pursue criminal charges unless you want to, but it gives us tremendous leverage in the divorce proceedings." Evelyn smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. "The prenuptial agreement your husband is so proud of includes a fidelity clause. Are you aware of that?" Maya blinked. "No. Garrett handled all the legal details. He said it was standard boilerplate." "It is standard. Standard language that says if either party engages in infidelity during the marriage, the prenup is void." Evelyn pulled out a highlighted section of paperwork. "Your husband was so confident that he would never get caught that he didn't even try to remove this clause, which means that as of last night, When he confirmed the affair in front of witnesses, your prenuptial agreement became worthless. What does that mean for the divorce? It means you're entitled to an equitable distribution of marital assets. Given that your father is the majority investor in your husband's firm, and given the fraud that Victoria Lane has been perpetrating, those assets are about to become very complicated. Evelyn's smile widened. In other words, Maya, your husband is about to discover what it feels like to have nothing. The morning news was already buzzing with the scandal. Maya sat on her father's couch, watching in disbelief as footage from the gala played on every channel. Someone had captured video of the confrontation. Not the whole thing, but enough. Enough to see James walking through the crowd like a man on a mission. Enough to see Garrett's face crumbling. Enough to see Victoria Lane fleeing toward the exit. Billionaire father crashes elite gala to defend daughter, read one headline. Secret fortune revealed. The man behind Richardson Capital, announced another. Wall Street's most powerful unknown player steps into the spotlight. Maya's phone had exploded overnight with messages. Friends she hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Journalists were requesting interviews. Even her old gallery contacts in Baltimore had reached out, wondering if she was planning to resume her art career. She ignored all of it. The only message she read was from Garrett, sent at 3:47 in the morning. We need to talk. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Call me. She deleted it without responding. Just after noon, Evelyn called with an update. Victoria Lane has been arrested, she announced. The FBI moved faster than I expected. They had her in custody by 10 o'clock. What happens to her now? Wire fraud, corporate espionage, conspiracy. She's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. Evelyn paused. There's more. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she's agreed to cooperate with the investigation. She's providing evidence not just about her own activities, but about other irregularities at the firm. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve your husband hiding assets, falsifying billing records, and potentially defrauding several major clients. Evelyn's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. It seems that Victoria Lane wasn't the only one with secrets at Sterling & Associates. Maya hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. 4 years. For 4 years she had lived with this man, slept beside him, tried to be the wife he wanted. And the entire time he had been building his empire on lies, on fraud, on the systematic betrayal of everyone who trusted him, including her. She found her father in his study, reading financial reports with a pair of glasses perched on his nose. Dad. He looked up, immediately setting aside his work. What's wrong? Victoria is cooperating with the FBI. She's giving them evidence about Garrett. Things I never knew about. James nodded slowly. I suspected there was more. Men like your husband don't stop at one kind of fraud. They're addicted to the feeling of getting away with things. I feel like such an idiot. Maya sank into the chair across from him. How could I have been so blind? I lived with him. I thought I knew him. You knew the person he wanted you to see. That's not the same as knowing who he really was. James removed his glasses, studying her face. Maya, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What's happening to Garrett right now? The investigation, the exposure, the destruction of everything he built. None of that is your fault. And none of it is your responsibility to fix. I know. Do you? Because I see the look in your eyes. That's guilt. And you have nothing to feel guilty about. It's not guilt. Maya struggled to find the right words. It's just, I spent so long trying to make that marriage work, trying to be what he wanted. And now I find out that it was all a lie from the beginning. The man I married never existed." "No," James agreed gently. "He didn't. But the woman you are, that's real. That's always been real. And that's what matters now." Maya's phone buzzed. Another message from Garrett. "I know you're angry, but we can work this out. I love you, Maya. I've always loved you." She stared at the words, feeling nothing but a cold, distant contempt. "He says he loves me." James glanced at the phone. "Of course he does. He's about to lose everything, and he thinks you're his lifeline. He'll say whatever he thinks will work." "It won't." "I know." James smiled slightly. "That's how I know you're going to be okay." The next few days passed in a blur of legal proceedings and media frenzy. Evelyn Carter proved to be worth every penny of whatever James was paying her, filing motions and counter-motions with a speed that left Garrett's legal team scrambling to keep up. The prenup was officially voided on day 3. The judge ruled that Garrett's confirmed infidelity triggered the fidelity clause, entitling Maya to full marital asset distribution. Garrett's attorneys tried to argue that the clause was unconscionable, that one dance didn't constitute proof of an affair, that the entire situation was a setup by Maya's family to destroy an innocent man. Judge Okonkwo wasn't buying it. "Mr. Whitmore," she said during the hearing, her voice carrying the weight of barely contained contempt, "you confirmed your relationship with Miss Lane in front of hundreds of witnesses. You then attempted to physically restrain your wife when she tried to leave. And you are now arguing that she is the one who acted improperly? Your Honor, with all due respect, you have shown my court no respect whatsoever, Mr. Whitmore. Nor have you shown your wife the respect she deserved during your marriage." The judge shuffled her papers. "The prenuptial agreement is void. Mrs. Whitmore is entitled to equitable distribution under New York law. We'll schedule a hearing to determine the exact division of assets once the criminal investigation has concluded." "Criminal investigation?" Garrett's attorney looked genuinely alarmed. "Your Honor, my client has not been charged with any crime." "Not yet." Judge Okonkwo fixed Garrett with a look that could freeze water. "But based on the evidence that's been presented to my court, I wouldn't make any long-term plans if I were him." Maya watched from the gallery as her husband was escorted out of the courtroom by his attorneys. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the exposure of his secrets had physically shrunk him. At the door, he turned and caught her eye. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret? Desperation? Or just the calculation of a man trying to figure out his next move? Then, he was gone. That evening, James took Maya to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the village. It was the kind of place that didn't appear in any guidebooks. Just a family-owned trattoria with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and fresh bread. "Your mother and I used to come here," James said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Before you were born. We'd sit at this exact table and talk for hours about all the things we wanted to do with our lives." Maya looked around the restaurant with new eyes. "She was from a wealthy family, you said. How did she end up here?" "She ran away." James smiled at the memory. "Packed a bag at 18, changed her name, got a job waiting tables. When I met her, she was putting herself through school to become a social worker. I didn't find out about her background until we'd been dating for almost a year." "Weren't you angry that she kept it from you?" "No, I understood. She was afraid I'd see her differently if I knew. That I'd see her family's money instead of her." He reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. "Sound familiar?" Maya laughed softly. "I guess I come by it honestly. Your mother used to say that secrets aren't lies. They're just truths you haven't found the right time to share." James's expression grew serious. "I should have told you about the money sooner. When you married Garrett, maybe. Or when I first saw signs that he was who he turned out to be? Why didn't you? Because you were happy, or I thought you were, and I told myself that your happiness mattered more than my concerns. He shook his head. I was wrong. I should have spoken up. Should have trusted you with the truth. You're trusting me now? I am. And from now on, no more secrets. Whatever you want to know about my business, my money, your mother's family, it's all yours. No more protecting you from things you have every right to understand. Maya considered this. For so long, she had felt like pieces of her life were hidden from her. Her mother's death when she was too young to really understand. Her father's mysterious ability to always have just enough money to help when she needed it. Garrett's gradual transformation from charming suitor to controlling husband. Now, finally, the fog was lifting. There is something I want to know, she said slowly. Anything. Victoria's betrayal, the corporate espionage. How did you find out about it? James was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I have people who watch things for me. Analysts, investigators, specialists in various fields. When you married Garrett, I had them start paying attention to Sterling and Associates. Not because I didn't trust you, because I didn't trust him. And they found Victoria. Not at first. At first, they just found irregularities, numbers that didn't add up, clients who complained privately about billing issues, a pattern of deals that fell through at the last minute. James set down his fork. Then, about 18 months ago, my people noticed that a rival firm, Harrison and Cole, seemed to be anticipating Sterling's moves with impossible accuracy, almost as if they had inside information. So you investigated. I had someone dig deeper. They found the connection to Victoria, the encrypted emails, the offshore payments, the whole network of betrayal she'd built right under your husband's nose. And you waited. Maya's voice wasn't accusing, just curious. You knew all of this, and you waited. I was gathering evidence, building a case that would be airtight. I wanted to make sure that when I moved, it would be devastating. James's eyes met hers. But I also kept waiting because I hoped that things would get better between you and Garrett. That he would become the man you thought you'd married. He didn't. No, he got worse. And when I heard what happened at the gala, when I heard how he treated you, I decided that waiting was no longer an option. Maya absorbed this. Her father had been playing a long game, positioning pieces on a board she hadn't even known existed. It was manipulative in its own way, she supposed. But it was manipulation born of love, of protection, of a parent's desperate desire to keep their child safe. Thank you, she said finally. For what? For coming when you did. For being who you are. For raising me to be strong enough to survive this. She felt tears prick her eyes. For buying all my art. James laughed, a warm sound that filled the small restaurant. That was purely selfish, baby girl. Those pieces are beautiful. They belong with someone who appreciates them. They belong with me. Then they're yours. All of them. The minute this is over, we'll move them wherever you want. Maya smiled through her tears. The woman who had walked into the gala 2 nights ago, broken, humiliated, forgotten, felt very far away. In her place was someone older, wiser, and infinitely more aware of her own worth. The restaurant owner appeared with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. On the house, he said, his accent thick with old-world warmth. For Mr. Richardson and his beautiful daughter. James accepted the wine with a nod of thanks, then raised his glass to Maya. To new beginnings. Maya raised her own glass. To truth. They drank together as the city hummed beyond the restaurant's walls. Two people bound by blood and love and secrets finally shared. Outside, somewhere in the Manhattan night, Garrett Whitmore was watching his empire crumble. But in this small restaurant, surrounded by the aroma of garlic and the warmth of her father's presence, Maya Richardson was finally beginning to rebuild. 2 weeks after the gala, Garrett Whitmore was indicted on 12 counts of fraud. Maya found out from the morning news, sitting in her father's kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. The footage showed Garrett being escorted out of his penthouse by federal agents, his hands cuffed in front of him, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, the same one he'd worn to court 3 days earlier, and his hair, usually so perfectly styled, was disheveled and unwashed. He looked like a man who had stopped caring about appearances. Or maybe he just couldn't afford to care anymore. Former legal titan faces 20 years in federal prison, the anchor announced. Sources say the indictment includes charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. James appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day. You saw. I saw. Maya didn't look away from the screen. They're saying 20 years. If convicted on all counts, yes, though his lawyers will likely negotiate a plea deal. James poured himself a cup of coffee. The question is what he's willing to give up in exchange for leniency. What do you mean? The FBI isn't just interested in Garrett. They want everyone he worked with. Every client who paid bribes. Every judge who accepted favors. Every politician who looked the other way. James sat down across from her. Your husband had his fingers in a lot of dirty pies, Maya. The government wants names. On screen, the footage switched to Victoria Lane being led into a courthouse. She looked worse than Garrett, thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The confident predator Maya had encountered at the gala was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Victoria's already cooperating, Maya said. Aggressively cooperating. She's given them everything. Emails, financial records, testimony about conversations she had with Garrett. Her lawyer is trying to position her as a victim, someone who was coerced into the espionage by threats from Marcus Webb. Do you believe that? James considered the question. I believe Victoria Lane would say anything to save herself. Whether it's true is another matter entirely. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn Carter. Need you at the courthouse by 2 p.m. Garrett's attorneys have requested an emergency meeting. They want to discuss settlement terms. Maya showed the message to her father. Settlement, she repeated. What does that mean? It means he's scared. He knows the criminal case is going badly, and he's trying to protect whatever assets he can from the divorce. James's expression hardened. He's going to try to make a deal, Maya. Offer you something that sounds generous, in exchange for you walking away quietly. I'm not interested in his deals. I know, but you should hear what he has to say. If nothing else, it will show you exactly how desperate he's become. The courthouse was a circus. Media vans lined the street. Reporters shouting questions at anyone who looked official. Photographers jostling for position on the steps. Maya entered through a side door, flanked by Evelyn and a security guard her father had insisted on. The meeting was held in a small conference room on the 5th floor. Garrett was already there when Maya arrived, seated at one end of a long table with his attorneys. 3 of them now, each looking more expensive and more exhausted than the last. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe. Or desperation wearing hope's mask. Maya. He started to rise. "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore." Evelyn's voice was ice. "This isn't a social call." Garrett sank back into his chair, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," one of his attorneys began. "My client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement in exchange for—" "Let him speak." Maya's voice surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "I want to hear it from him." The attorneys exchanged glances. Garrett cleared his throat. "Maya, I know I've made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But you have to believe me when I say that I never stopped loving you. Everything I did, the long hours, the stress, the distance between us, it was all for us, for our future." "Our future." Maya's voice was flat. "Is that what you call dancing with your mistress while I watched?" Garrett flinched. "Victoria meant nothing to me. She was a distraction, a moment of weakness. You're my wife, the only woman I've ever truly loved." "You don't know what love means." "I do. I swear I do. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." He leaned forward, his handcuffs clinking against the table. "I'm prepared to give you everything, Maya. The penthouse, the accounts, whatever you want. Just drop the divorce proceedings. Stand by me through this trial. Show the world that we're still a team." Maya stared at him. The man she had married, the charming, confident man who had promised her the world, was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a frightened animal, cornered and desperate, willing to say anything to survive. "You want me to stand by you," she said slowly. Yes, that's all I'm asking." "After 4 years of telling me I was nothing, after mocking my art, my family, my very existence, after humiliating me in front of everyone we knew." Maya's voice was rising now, the anger she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. "You want me to smile for the cameras and pretend that none of it happened? I'll change. I'll be different. I'll be the man you fell in love with." "That man never existed, Garrett. He was a performance, a mask you wore to get what you wanted." Maya stood, her chair scraping back against the floor. "I spent 4 years trying to find him, trying to understand what I'd done wrong, why the man who used to look at me like I was the most precious thing in the world suddenly couldn't stand the sight of me. And now I know the truth. There was nothing wrong with me. There was only ever something wrong with you." "Maya, please, I'm not finished." Her voice cracked like a whip, silencing him. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the affair. It's not the fraud. It's not even the way you treated me at that party. The worst part is that you made me doubt myself. You made me believe that I was less than I am. You took the best parts of me and tried to grind them into dust." Garrett's face had gone pale. His attorneys were very still, watching the scene unfold with the horrified fascination of men who knew their client was drowning. "I loved you," Maya continued, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "I loved you with everything I had. I gave up my career, my friends, my home, everything that made me who I was, because I believed that you loved me too, and you used that love like a weapon." "I made mistakes." "Stop calling them mistakes." Maya slammed her palm on the table. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying the wrong thing at a party. What you did was systematic, calculated. You spent 4 years dismantling my identity piece by piece, and you want me to believe it was just a series of mistakes?" Silence hung in the room like smoke. Garrett's lead attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps we could take a short break. No. Maya turned to face him. No breaks. No negotiations. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to proceed with the divorce. I'm going to take exactly what I'm entitled to under New York law. Nothing more, nothing less. And then, I'm going to walk away from this marriage and never look back. You'll regret this, Garrett said, a new edge creeping into his voice. When the dust settles, when your father's money can't protect you anymore, you'll realize what you threw away. What I threw away? Maya laughed, a cold, bitter sound. You still don't get it, do you? I didn't throw away anything. You did. You had a wife who would have walked through fire for you, who believed in you when no one else did, who would have stood by you through anything if you just treated her like a human being. She leaned down, her face inches from his. But you couldn't do that, could you? You couldn't let yourself love someone who might actually see you for who you really are. So you tried to break me first. Make me small enough that I could never challenge you, never question you, never threaten your precious ego. It didn't work, Maya straightened. I'm still standing, and you're the one in handcuffs. She turned and walked toward the door. Maya. Garrett's voice was desperate now. Maya, wait. We can work this out. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Just don't leave. Please, I'm begging you. She stopped with her hand on the door handle. Goodbye, Garrett. And then she was gone. The days that followed were a blur of depositions and paperwork. Evelyn worked with the efficiency of a surgeon, cutting through Garrett's legal defenses with precision and ruthlessness. The asset division was complicated by the ongoing criminal investigation, but James's team of forensic accountants had been working behind the scenes for weeks, tracing every hidden account and offshore shell company. He's been hiding money for years, Evelyn explained during one of their meetings. Accounts in the Caymans, properties in the Bahamas, investments routed through Switzerland. If the FBI hadn't frozen everything, he would have fled the country within months. With Victoria? Possibly. Or he might have left her behind. Men like Garrett don't form attachments. They form alliances. When an alliance stops being useful, they discard it. Maya thought about that. She thought about all the times Garrett had made her feel like she was the problem, the obstacle, the thing standing between him and happiness. And all along, he'd been planning his escape, building a life raft for himself while letting her drown. What happens to the firm? Sterling and Associates will likely be dissolved. The partners are scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal, and most of the major clients have already jumped ship. Evelyn shuffled through some papers. Your father has offered to help some of the junior associates find positions at other firms. The ones who weren't involved in the fraud, anyway. That's kind of him. That's strategic of him. Those associates will remember who helped them when they were vulnerable. In 5 years, some of them will be partners at other firms, judges, politicians. Your father is building loyalty across an entire generation of legal professionals. Maya smiled slightly. She was beginning to understand her father's approach to power. It wasn't about domination or control. It was about relationships, about being the person others turn to in their darkest moments and earning their gratitude for a lifetime. I have news about Victoria, Evelyn continued. Her plea deal fell through. What happened? The FBI discovered she'd been lying about the extent of her cooperation. She was still hiding things, other clients she'd betrayed, other firms she'd infiltrated. When they found out, they pulled the deal and added new charges. What does that mean for her? 25 to 30 years, most likely. The judge isn't feeling merciful. Evelyn closed her folder. She tried to call you, by the way, 3 times yesterday. I had the calls blocked. What did she want? To apologize, apparently, or to explain, or to beg for help. Evelyn shrugged. Hard to tell the difference with someone like her. Maya felt nothing at this news. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Victoria Lane had been a predator, circling Maya's life like a shark, waiting for the moment to strike. Now, she was in a cage of her own making, and Maya couldn't bring herself to care. "There's one more thing," Evelyn hesitated. "Your husband wants to see you. One last time." "No. He says it's important, that there are things he needs to tell you before the trial. If he has information relevant to the case, he can tell his lawyers. I'm done talking to Garrett Whitmore." Evelyn nodded, seeming satisfied with this response. "Good. I'll let his team know." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. Some knot in her chest that wouldn't come loose. She had walked away from Garrett. She had stood up to him, told him exactly what he had done to her, refused his desperate offers. So why did she still feel this weight pressing down on her? She found her father in his study that evening, reading by the light of an old brass lamp. "Can I ask you something?" James set down his book. "Anything." "How did you know? When you married Mom, how did you know she was the right person?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I didn't," he finally said. "Not for certain. You never really know, Maya. You make a choice based on the best information you have, and then you commit to that choice. You work at it. You grow together. You face the hard times, and you come out the other side." "But what if you choose wrong?" "Then you face that too. You acknowledge the mistake, you learn what you can from it, and you move forward." James took off his glasses. "Maya, you didn't fail because your marriage failed. You succeeded because you had the courage to end something that was destroying you. That takes more strength than staying ever could." I keep wondering if I missed something. Some sign that I should have seen, some warning I ignored. There probably were signs. There usually are. But Garrett was very good at what he did. He spent his entire career manipulating people, convincing them to trust him when they shouldn't. You weren't foolish for believing him. You were human. Maya sat down in the chair across from him. "I don't know who I am anymore, Dad. For 4 years I was Garrett's wife. That was my whole identity. And now you get to figure out who Maya Richardson is." James leaned forward. "That's not a tragedy. That's an opportunity. How many people get a chance to completely rebuild their lives? To take everything they've learned and use it to become someone stronger, wiser, more fully themselves? What if I don't know where to start?" James smiled. "Start with what you love. You're an artist, Maya. You always have been. That part of you never went away. It just went dormant. Wake it up. Let it guide you." Maya thought about her old studio in Baltimore. The way the light came through the windows in the morning. The smell of fabric dye and cotton thread. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw materials. "My art," she said slowly. "Your art. Your passion. Your gift. Garrett tried to take that from you, but he couldn't. It's still there, waiting for you to come back to it." The next morning, Maya went to the basement of her father's brownstone. It was massive, much larger than she had expected, stretching beneath not just the brownstone, but the 2 adjacent buildings her father apparently owned. And every wall, every surface, every inch of available space was covered with her work. Tapestries she had woven in college, wall hangings from her first gallery shows, textile pieces she had sold at farmers markets before she ever dreamed of having her own studio. Work she hadn't seen in years, work she'd forgotten she'd ever made. Her father had collected it all. Maya walked through the space slowly, running her fingers over familiar fabrics. Tears streamed down her face, But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming. This was who she was. This was who she had always been. Not Garrett's wife, not the socialite, not the woman trying desperately to fit into a world that didn't want her. She was an artist, a creator, someone who could take thread and fiber and transform them into something beautiful. She had forgotten that. Garrett had made her forget. But standing here, surrounded by the evidence of her own talent, she remembered. "I want to start again," she said aloud, to the empty room, or to herself, or to the universe. "I want to create." And for the first time in 4 years, she believed she could. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday in October. Maya signed the papers in Evelyn's office, her hands steady, her heart calm. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final showdown with Garrett. Just paperwork, signatures, and a stamp that said their marriage was officially over. "Congratulations," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "You're a free woman." "Thank you," Maya set down the pen, "for everything. It's been my pleasure. I don't often get to work on cases with such satisfying outcomes." Evelyn extended her hand. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you have my number." Maya shook her hand, then walked out of the office and into the rain. She didn't go back to her father's brownstone. Instead, she walked. Through the wet streets of Manhattan, past the gleaming towers and anonymous crowds, past the coffee shops and galleries and sidewalk vendors. She walked until her feet ached and her clothes were soaked and she couldn't remember why she had ever been afraid. The city, which had always felt like Garrett's territory, suddenly seemed full of possibilities. Every street was a path she hadn't taken. Every building was a story she hadn't heard. Every face in the crowd was a life she might touch with her work. She stopped in front of a small gallery in Soho. In the window was a sign, "Space available for exhibition." Maya looked at the sign for a long time. Then she pushed open the door and walked inside. "Can I help you?" The gallery owner was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. "I'm an artist," Maya said. "Textile work. And I'm looking for a place to show." The woman studied her for a moment, taking in her wet hair and soggy clothes and the determined set of her jaw. "Tell me about your work." And Maya did. She talked about weaving and thread, about color and texture, about the way fabric could capture emotion in a way that paint never could. She talked about her early years in Baltimore, her gallery shows, her years of silence. She talked until her voice was hoarse, and the gallery owner was smiling. "I'd like to see some pieces," the woman said finally. "Can you bring them by tomorrow?" "Yes." Maya felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been closed for a very long time. "Yes, I can." She walked back out into the rain, and for the first time since the gala, she felt something like joy. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too simple a word for what she was feeling. This was bigger than that. This was the recognition that she had survived something terrible and come out the other side. That she had lost everything she thought she wanted and discovered what she truly needed. She was Maya Richardson, artist, daughter, survivor, and she was just getting started. 6 months later, Maya stood in the center of the Harlow Gallery in Soho, surrounded by her work. The exhibition was called Unraveled, a collection of 12 pieces that traced the arc of her journey from silence to voice, from captivity to freedom. Each tapestry told a story, the dark, tangled threads of the cage, the violent reds and blacks of the Gala, the gradual emergence of light in the reckoning, and finally, the explosion of color and texture in Reborn, the massive centerpiece that hung in the gallery's main wall. The opening was in 2 hours. Maya walked through the empty space, adjusting a frame here, straightening a label there, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Stop fussing," her father's voice came from the doorway. "Everything is perfect." Maya turned to find James watching her with a mixture of pride and amusement. He was dressed simply, as always. A charcoal suit with no tie, comfortable shoes that could have belonged to any retiree. "I'm not fussing, I'm arranging." "You've arranged those same 3 pieces 4 times in the last hour." James walked over to stand beside her. "It's going to be fine, Maya. Better than fine. The preview reviews have been extraordinary." He wasn't exaggerating. The art world had taken notice of Maya Richardson's return. A feature in Art Forum. A mention in the New York Times style section. 3 different collectors had already inquired about purchasing pieces before the show even opened. "I know," Maya took a deep breath. I haven't done this in so long. What if people don't understand what I'm trying to say?" "Then they don't understand. That's their limitation, not yours." James put his hand on her shoulder. "Your mother used to get nervous before every presentation she gave. Did I ever tell you that?" "No." She was terrified of public speaking, absolutely terrified. But she did it anyway, because she believed in what she had to say. His eyes softened at the memory. "You have that same courage, Maya, that same fire. It's been banked for a while, but it never went out." Maya looked at the centerpiece. Reborn. It was the most ambitious piece she had ever created. 6 feet tall, woven from hundreds of different threads in colors that ranged from the deepest black to the most brilliant gold. At first glance, it looked chaotic, almost violent. But if you stepped back and let your eyes adjust, a pattern emerged. A woman, rising from darkness into light, her arms outstretched, her face lifted towards something the viewer couldn't see, but could feel. "I made that for her," Maya said quietly. "For Mom. I wanted her to see what I've become." James was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "She sees it, baby girl. Wherever she is, she sees it." The gallery doors opened at 7 o'clock, and by 7:30, the space was packed. Maya moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting compliments, answering questions, posing for photographs with collectors and critics and people she had never met. The nervous flutter in her stomach had transformed into something else, a kind of electric excitement that made everything feel sharper, more vivid. "Ms. Richardson, your use of texture in the cage is extraordinary. Can you tell me about your process?" "Maya, over here. Just one more photo for the Times." "Excuse me, I represent a collector who would like to discuss acquiring the entire exhibition. Can we schedule a meeting?" It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Maya had dreamed of this moment for years, of having her work seen, of being taken seriously as an artist, of standing in a room full of people who understood what she was trying to say. And now it was happening. Around 9 o'clock, she found a quiet corner to catch her breath. A waiter brought her a glass of water, and she drank it gratefully, watching the crowd buzz around her pieces. "Congratulations!" The voice came from behind her. Maya turned to find a woman she didn't recognize. Older, elegant, with silver hair swept up in a simple chignon, and dark eyes that held a knowing warmth. "Thank you. Have we met?" "Not directly, but I've been following your work for a long time." The woman extended her hand. "Eleanor Grace. I was a friend of your mother's." Maya's heart skipped. "You knew my mother?" "We grew up together. Same neighborhood, same prep school, same pressure to be perfect little heiresses." Eleanor smiled sadly. When Grace ran away, I was the only one who knew where she'd gone. I helped her start her new life. And I watched from a distance as she built something beautiful with your father. I didn't know she had any friends from that time. She didn't want you to know. She was afraid that if you learned about her background, you might feel pressured to live up to it, or ashamed of it. Eleanor looked around the gallery. But I think she would have wanted you to know now. Now that you've proven, to yourself and everyone else, exactly who you are. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. What was she like when you knew her? Fierce, stubborn, absolutely certain that the life she was born into wasn't the life she was meant to live. Eleanor's voice softened. She was an artist too, you know. Not textiles. She painted. Watercolors mostly. She had real talent, but her family wouldn't hear of it. Art was a hobby for their kind of people, not a career. She never told me. She gave it up when she ran away. Said she needed to make a clean break from everything, including the dreams that had been hers in that old life. Eleanor reached out and touched Maya's arm. But I think she would be so proud seeing you here tonight. You're living the life she never got to have. Maya couldn't speak. All those years, she had thought she was honoring her mother's memory by building something practical, something that could survive in the real world. She had never known that her mother had carried the same artistic fire, the same longing to create. Thank you for telling me, she finally managed. Thank you for inviting me. Eleanor squeezed her arm. Your mother would have moved mountains to be here tonight. Since she can't, I wanted to stand in her place. She disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Maya alone with a truth she had never suspected. The exhibition was a triumph. Every piece sold within the first week, including Reborn, which went to a private collector for a sum that made Maya's head spin. The reviews were rapturous, praising her technical skill, her emotional depth, her ability to transform personal trauma into universal art. But the reviews weren't what Maya remembered most. She remembered the woman who stood in front of the cage for 20 minutes, crying silently, then approached Maya afterward to say, "You told my story. I've never seen anyone tell my story before." She remembered the young art student who asked if she could study Maya's techniques, her eyes bright with the same hunger Maya had felt at that age. She remembered her father, standing in front of Reborn at the end of the night, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. These were the moments that mattered. Not the money, not the fame, not the validation of critics and collectors. The moments of connection. The proof that her work could touch people, could help them feel less alone. Garrett's trial began 3 weeks after the exhibition opened. Maya didn't attend, but she followed the coverage in the news. The prosecution's case was devastating. Witness after witness took the stand to describe Garrett's fraud, his manipulation, his systematic betrayal of everyone who had trusted him. Former clients testified about overbilling. Former associates described a culture of intimidation and lies. The forensic accountants traced millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. And then Victoria Lane took the stand. Maya watched the footage from her father's living room, unable to look away, as the woman who had tried to destroy her marriage detailed her affair with Garrett in clinical, unflinching terms. He told me his wife was frigid, Victoria said, her voice flat. Uninterested in intimacy. He said the marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. It made things easier. Victoria's eyes dropped. But I knew, deep down, that he was lying. I saw how she looked at him. She loved him. She really loved him. And yet you continued the affair. Yes. Victoria's voice cracked. I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of any of it." Maya turned off the television. She didn't need to hear any more. The next morning, she went to her new studio, a converted warehouse in Brooklyn that her father had helped her purchase. It was flooded with natural light and filled with looms and threads and all the raw materials of her craft. She was working on a new piece when her phone rang. Evelyn Carter. "Maya, the jury came back." "Already?" "It only took them 4 hours. Guilty on all counts." Evelyn's voice held a note of grim satisfaction. "The sentencing is scheduled for next month, but the judge indicated he's considering the maximum." Maya set down her shuttle. "How many years?" 25 to 30, most likely. He'll be an old man when he gets out. If he gets out. 25 years. Maya tried to feel something. Triumph, perhaps, or vindication. But all she felt was a kind of distant sadness. Not for Garrett, but for the waste of it all. The waste of his intelligence, his charisma, his potential. The waste of their marriage. The waste of the years she had spent trying to be enough for someone who was incapable of recognizing her worth. "Maya, are you there?" "I'm here. Thank you for letting me know." "There's something else. Garrett has requested to see you. Before the sentencing." "No." "That's what I told his lawyers. But they said he has something he wants to give you. Something that belonged to your mother." Maya's breath caught. "What?" "They wouldn't say. They just said it was important to him that you have it." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing the request. The last thing she wanted was to see Garrett again, to give him any opportunity to manipulate her emotions or make her doubt herself. But something that belonged to her mother? "I'll think about it." She spent 3 days thinking. She talked to her father, who advised against it. She talked to Evelyn, who said the decision was hers alone. She talked to Eleanor Grace, who listened quietly and then said, "Sometimes closure requires facing the thing you're most afraid of." In the end, it was that word, closure, that decided her. The prison was an hour north of the city, a gray compound surrounded by razor wire and watchtowers. Maya was escorted through security checkpoints and metal detectors, her heart pounding harder with each step. They led her to a small visiting room with a table and 2 chairs. She sat down and waited. The door opened. Garrett walked in. He had aged a decade in 6 months. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the kind of deep fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You came," he finally said. "They said you have something of my mother's." "I do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I found it years ago in a box of old photographs. I meant to give it to you, but I kept forgetting." He slid it across the table. Maya unwrapped it carefully. It was a ring. A simple gold band with a small sapphire, worn and slightly tarnished with age. "It was in a picture of your parents' wedding," Garrett said. "Your mother was wearing it. I had one of my people track it down. It took years." Maya stared at the ring. She had never seen any pictures of her parents' wedding. Her father had told her they were lost in a fire years ago. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I loved you." Garrett's voice cracked. "I know you don't believe that. I know I gave you every reason not to believe it. But I did love you, Maya, in my own broken, inadequate way. Love doesn't look like what you did to me." "I know. I know that now." He leaned back in his chair. "When I met you, I thought you were the most extraordinary person I'd ever seen. This beautiful, talented woman who created things out of nothing, who looked at the world with such hope and wonder. And then you tried to destroy those things, because I was afraid of them. Afraid that if you kept creating, kept shining, you'd eventually see how small I really was, how empty. His eyes glistened. So I tried to make you small too. I thought if I could just contain you, you'd never outgrow me. Maya felt the old anger stir, but it was muted now, distant. Looking at the broken man across from her, she couldn't summon the rage she'd felt before. "You didn't contain me," she said quietly. "You just delayed me." "I know. I've seen the reviews of your exhibition, the pictures of your work." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're extraordinary, Maya. You always were. I was just too afraid to let you know it." She looked at the ring in her hand, her mother's ring, a piece of a life she had never known. "Why give me this now?" "Because I wanted to do one good thing, one real thing, before they lock me away for the rest of my life." Garrett's voice dropped. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to have something beautiful, something that connects you to the person you came from." Maya closed her hand around the ring. She thought about all the things she could say, all the accusations, all the pain, all the years of silence and humiliation. But none of it seemed to matter anymore. "Goodbye, Garrett." She stood and walked toward the door. "Maya." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "I hope you find everything you're looking for. I hope you have a life so full of beauty and love that you forget I ever existed." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's what you deserve." She walked out without looking back. The drive home was quiet. Maya held her mother's ring in her palm, feeling its weight, its history, its connection to a woman she had lost too soon. When she got back to the brownstone, her father was waiting in the study. "How was it?" Maya sat down across from him and opened her hand to show him the ring. James's breath caught. His eyes filled with tears. "Grace's ring. I thought it was lost forever." "He found it. Years ago, apparently. He was saving it." Maya handed it to her father. "I thought you should have it." James held the ring up to the light. For a long moment, he was lost in memory. "Your mother wore this on our wedding day. It belonged to her grandmother, the one person in her family who supported her choice to leave." He slipped it onto his pinky finger, the only one it would fit. "She always said this ring was a symbol of courage, of choosing love over security, freedom over expectation." "Dad," Maya leaned forward, "I want to know everything. About Mom's family, about where she came from, about the life she left behind." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. No more secrets. No more protection. I want to know who she was. All of who she was." James nodded slowly. "Then I'll tell you. Everything. But not tonight. Tonight, I think we should just be grateful." "Grateful for what?" "For this." He gestured around the room, at the books, the art, the warmth of the old brownstone. "For finding our way back to each other. For surviving the storm." Maya looked at her father. This man who had loved her enough to let her go, and loved her enough to catch her when she fell. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, baby girl. More than you'll ever know." 1 year after the gala, Maya Richardson opened her second exhibition. This one was called Legacy, a collection of pieces inspired by her mother's story, by the courage it takes to leave everything you know in search of something real. The opening was even bigger than the first. Critics called her one of the most important textile artists of her generation. Collectors flew in from around the world. Museums inquired about permanent acquisitions. But Maya's favorite moment came at the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and the cameras had gone home. She stood in front of the centerpiece, a massive tapestry called Grace, woven in shades of blue and gold and white. It depicted a woman walking away from a mansion toward a rising sun, her arms open, her face lifted to the light. Her father came to stand beside her. She would have loved this. I hope so. Maya touched the edge of the tapestry. I wanted to tell her story. The story she never got to tell herself. You did. Beautifully. James put his arm around her. What's next? Maya smiled. It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in a very long time. Not the practiced grin of a socialite, but the genuine expression of a woman who had finally found her way home. Everything, she said. Everything is next. And standing there in the quiet gallery, surrounded by the work of her hands and the love of her father, Maya Richardson knew it was true. She had walked through fire. She had lost everything she thought she wanted. She had discovered that the people closest to her were not who they seemed, and that the only person she could truly count on was herself. But she had also found something she never expected, a strength she didn't know she had, a talent she had almost forgotten, and a future that belonged entirely to her. The woman who had stood silent while her husband humiliated her was gone. In her place was an artist, a survivor, a daughter who had finally learned the truth about her own extraordinary legacy. Maya Richardson had been broken, but she had not been destroyed. She had been unraveled, thread by thread, until nothing remained but the raw material of her own soul. And from those threads, she had woven something new, something beautiful, something entirely her own.